Her former stepdaughter sprayed lemon air freshener straight at her. Marion Drake, retired librarian and once family matriarch, didn't blink. Claire smiled like she still owned the house she'd never paid for. By evening, Marion had signed the deed reclaiming every inch with ink. She had raised Claire like her own once-but daughters don't file liens. And when Claire came swinging legal threats, Marion answered with a courtroom win. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. A spritz of air freshener and Marion's pulse jolted like a warning bell. The can hissed again. Claire moved her hand like she was smoothing perfume into the air itself, her wrist flicking with exaggerated grace, as if the citrus scent could erase history. The act was theatrical pointed, and far too choreographed to be casual. Marion stood still, pretending to adjust a placemat. But the lemon stung behind her eyes, needling into her sinuses like acid. Her body stiffened involuntarily, an echo of something dark and buried clawing to the surface. Claire's eyes never quite landed on her, but the angle of her smile said it all. David paused mid-slice at the kitchen island, the knife pressed into the meat but unmoving. He looked up, just briefly, just long enough. There was something faint in his expression-awe crease of concern at the edge, a flicker of tension just behind the eyes. Marion didn't return the glance. She moved to the drawer and opened it, keeping her motions fluid, her breathing shallow. The noise of the drawer sliding out was too loud, the clatter of spoons too sharp. And then she saw it. The paper. Tucked, but not hidden, peeking from beneath the kitchen towels like it wanted to be found. The deed. She blinked slowly, steadying her hand as her fingers brushed the folded edge. Had someone gone through the drawer? Had Claire? No, Claire would have waved it in her face, not left it lying like bait. She shut the drawer carefully, turned away with a half-swallowed breath, and wiped her hands on the dish towel as if nothing at all had been disturbed. Her phone sat on the counter, black screen glowing to life with the brush of her fingertip. It unlocked instantly, like it knew what she needed. The text thread with Grace was already open. Her name pulsed at the top anchoring, dangerous. Claire's humming began again, light, tuneless, wafting across the kitchen like smoke from a candle. David said nothing. His knife moved again, slicing too cleanly, too quietly. Marion typed, "Proceed." The words stared back at her, delicate and deadly. Her thumb hovered over send. Everything in the room waited with her. Claire pulled out the wine glasses. David wiped the blade on a towel. Someone laughed outside, muffled and distant, as if the world beyond their walls still had joy in it. Inside, everything was tight, dense, waiting to rupture. She thought of Grace, of the plan, of how far she'd come, and what little was left. Just this moment, just this tap. Her thumb trembled, then steadied. Her breath moved slow, controlled. And in a silence that seemed to bow before her will, Marion tapped send. Steadying herself, Marion lit lavender end, lit a spark of defiance. The air was still thick with lemon, but Marion, now seated at the head of the table, refused to let that scent claim the evening. She struck a match, slow and deliberate. Holding it to the wick of a lavender candle she placed at the center of the linen runner. The flame hesitated, then caught. The sharp, clean herbal scent began to rise, curling gently upward like a boundary drawn in smoke. The candle was subtle, but it pushed back. It claimed space. Across the table, Grace settled into her chair without fanfare. No hug, no fake warmth, just present solid, calm. Her tailored blazer was quiet armor, her eyes scanning the room like a strategist choosing her ground. Claire poured wine into crystal glasses, but her rhythm faltered just once, just enough. The bottle clinked a fraction too hard against the rim. She masked it with a smile, but the cracks were showing. "Nice to see you again, Grace," Claire offered, voice honeyed and taut. "So glad you could join us." Grace didn't flinch. "This home," she said evenly, folding her hands on the tablecloth, "holds Marion's legacy." The words landed soft, but they sank deep. Claire blinked. Just once. And that was enough. The mask of confidence shifted ever so slightly. Beneath it, fear. Not panic. Not yet. But the tremor of someone who had never expected the tides to turn. David entered quietly and stood by the archway, a towel still slung over one shoulder. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. But the line of his jaw, the way his eyes lingered on Marion, said everything. He was no longer neutral. He was listening. Marion didn't look at him. Not yet. Her attention remained forward on Grace, on the candle, on the path she had finally chosen. Grace leaned in slightly. There are ways to move forward. Cleanly. We'll take the legal route. You won't need to say much. You've already said enough with that deed. The word felt like steel. Claire's hand tensed around the stem of her glass. I'll draft the notice, Grace continued. This isn't revenge. It's reclamation. No more shadows. No more whispers. Claire opened her mouth but closed it again when Marion finally met her gaze. For the first time, Claire looked uncertain in her own home. Marion reached for her glass. Her hand was steady now. Do it, she said simply. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was power in the calm. The candle flame wavered swayed with the breath of the room, but didn't go out. David stepped forward, picking up a plate. Pretending to clear but his eyes brushed past Claire and landed, briefly, on Grace. A silent acknowledgement. Then he turned and left without a word. Claire stood rigid. Alone at the far end of the table, she was suddenly too far from everything, too far from control. The candle between them burned brighter, lavender smoothing the edges of the air. It smelled like a clearing, like a new page. Marion didn't look away. Even as the candle flickered, she simply steadied her gaze. Claire burst in, tears shining her, fear of being erased. The room had stilled. The candle burned low, its lavender edge curling warm and steady through the air. Then Claire reappeared, sudden, breathless shoulders tight and chest heaving like she'd run through her own storm. Her eyes were glassy, her arms stiff at her sides. I saw it, she said, voice cracking through the stillness like a dropped plate. The email. The deed. I saw it. Everyone froze. Marion remained seated. Grace didn't move. David stepped back in from the kitchen with a folded dish towel, the tension slicing into him like glass under skin. Claire moved forward slowly, her heels too loud on the hardwood. I didn't want to lose everything, she whispered. Her voice snagged on the words. I just wanted to belong here. This house, this name, all of it. It gave me a story. I didn't come from anything, Marion. No one answered. She looked around, pleading not with anger now, but with something raw, something nearly childlike. Tears welled at the corners of her eyes, and for a second, she didn't look like the woman who sprayed lemon into someone's face like poison. She looked like a girl who had learned early how to perform power because she'd never been handed any. Marion's hand rested on the pen Grace had slid in front of her. The paperwork lay ready, the ink uncapped. Her fingers tensed, but the pen stayed still. Claire's eyes moved to it. She breathed out, a shudder, like it took something out of her. I didn't take it to hurt you. I took it so I wouldn't disappear. David leaned against the edge of the wall, eyes locked on Claire not with sympathy, but with history. Long history. You could see it in the way his jaw moved, the way his hands didn't know what to do. Grace's voice entered soft, not pushing, not crowding. You stand for your rights, she said, looking only at Marion. And you still can. Marion looked up at Claire, her gaze unreadable. There was no triumph, no vengeance, only the slow realization that Claire, for all her control, had been just as afraid of fading, of being no one. Something shifted in the air. Claire dropped her gaze. You can take it. I get it now. You should. Her voice broke open. I just didn't want to vanish. There it was, the truth, naked and unbeautiful. Grace closed her eyes. Just for a moment. David exhaled through his nose, as if holding on to restraint with the edge of his teeth. Marion lowered her eyes to the page again. The pen pressed to her skin, cool and smooth. No more rage. No more needing Claire to feel small. That wasn't the point anymore. This was legacy. This was line in the sand. This was identity reclaimed. She signed. Claire, the antagonist until now, stood quiet small not as a threat, but as a human broken open. And suddenly, the room felt different, like gravity had adjusted. David sat, quietly. Grace nodded once. Claire looked down at the paper. Her breath shook, but she didn't speak. As the ink soaked into the page, the house seemed to exhale Marion's world shifting with the stroke. Deed signed and Claire hit back with legal fire. The signature was barely dry when Marion's phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't look at it right away. She stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the last of the afternoon light melt across the floorboards like spilled honey. The quiet felt earned for a second. Then another vibration, and another. Grace was already moving. She reached the phone, scanned the screen, and tilted it toward Marion without a word. A legal notice, filed just minutes ago. A lien. Claire hadn't even left the property, but she'd already struck back. Marion took the phone, fingers tightening, breath catching in her chest like it hit a wall. Her name was there, along with the property parcel number. The lien amount was bold, brazen. A fresh choke of lemon air rose from her memory of games, of tactics, of years twisted into performance. I thought we had turned a page, Marion whispered, mostly to herself. I gave her Grace. I gave her that. David came into the room, slower than usual. His face looked paler now, eyes ringed with the kind of fatigue no sleep could fix. She already had it ready, he said quietly. She must have filed it as soon as she saw you sign. Grace didn't soften. This is a retaliatory move. It won't hold, not long term. But it's a mess we need to address fast. Marion turned the screen again. Her reflection ghosted against the glass a woman holding a promise, staring down betrayal. Leanne for back repairs, she said. She's claiming she funded them alone. She didn't, David muttered. We both know that. The accounts were joint. You have the records. But does the mortgage holder? Grace asked, already pulling her phone from her bag. Because they just got this notice too. And they'll protect themselves first. As if summoned, a new notification pinged on Marion's screen. She opened eye, tan stilled. Subject line. Urgent. Request for documentation. From the lender's legal department. Her pulse ticked louder. Grace took one look and nodded briskly. Call them, now. Explain everything. Be calm, be clear. Marion didn't move. The betrayal hadn't gutted her, but it had singed something. Claire hadn't thrown a tantrum. She'd filed a document. A precise, cold maneuver meant to cast doubt before Marion could even enjoy the win. David leaned closer. You can't let her control the frame. Not again. Marion looked at him. Something in his eyes bruised, but certain met hers with a steadiness she hadn't expected. No, Marion said finally. No more dodging. No more waiting for her to undo me. She opened the lender's email. Words swamphrases like immediate action, third-party claims, ownership verification. Her world had shifted just minutes ago, and already Claire was trying to drag it backward. But not this time. Grace pulled out a folder. We've got copies of everything. Bank transfers, contractor letters, the invoice trail. They're just trying to see if you flinch. Marion exhaled slowly, then sat down. The pen from earlier still lay nearby now, meaningless. This wasn't about reclaiming her name anymore. This was about defending it. She clicked to reply, the subject line staring back like a flare. Urgent. Evidence needed. Documents fanned across the table, each one a weight in Marion's hand. The kitchen table, once reserved for roasts and warm bread, was now covered in legal ammunition. Marion stood over it, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, as if preparing for surgery. Bank statements, contractor receipts, time-stamped emails, the deed, the lien. Each paper felt heavier than its weight. Each word another thread in a net she couldn't afford to let slip. David sat beside her. Cross-checking the binder Grace had prepped against the screen of her laptop, his finger moved with a steadiness Marion hadn't seen in him in years. Not since before Claire. Grace's reading glasses perched at the end of her nose as she marked sections with a highlight turno color code. Just urgency. This one contradicts her lean. Grace tapped the page. She acknowledged joint payment here. Marion's head ached from the fluorescent overhead, but her eyes stayed focused. She couldn't sleep, couldn't afford distraction. The court date was set. Then her phone buzzed. She hesitated. No more surprises. She thought, but checked it anyway. A voicemail from Claire. She played it on speaker. Claire's voice was unsteady. I know you're going to court. A breath, shaky, sharp. I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't want to destroy you, Marion. I panicked. I didn't think you'd really fight me. Silence. Then, do what you need to. I don't know who I am without this house, but maybe that's not your problem anymore. Click. No apology, no offer to undo it, just guilt, loose and bitter in the air. Marion looked down at the folder again. A knock at the back door broke the silence. David answered, and returned with a folded note. From Mary next door, the one with the lilacs. Inside, you're not alone. Don't back down. Not now. Marion read it twice. Her fingers trembled not from fear, but from the effort of holding herself steady. She picked up one of the proof-san invoice Claire had signed herself, right there in black ink. For a second, she gripped it too tightly. The paper nearly tore. But she closed her eyes, exhaled, released it. No outbursts. No chaos. That was Claire's way. This steady, unshaking focus was hers. David reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Grace stood. We'll meet you at the courthouse. You're ready. Marion nodded. The folder was zipped shut. Her coat was pulled from the chair. She moved to the door. And as the courthouse came into view, Marion paused on last moment to turn back. David's quiet question landed like a challenge in Marion's stomach. The courthouse loomed ahead, a rectangular shadow against the afternoon sky. Marion stood just beyond the curb, folder clutched tight in her arms. The wind, catching the edge of her coat like it too, wanted to drag her back. David's voice was barely above a murmur. Are you ready to fight her forever? Not accusatory, not pitying, just honest. The kind of truth that slipped out when time ran out and only rawness remained. Marion didn't answer. She looked at the building's sterile windows, no welcome mat, no comfort, just a process, and a door she had to walk through. I'm not fighting her, she said slowly, her throat tight. I'm fighting the idea that she gets to decide who I am. David nodded, but his silence felt like the second half of a sentence he hadn't finished. She could feel his doubt in the space between them. Not doubt in her bit in what this would cost. Grace approached from behind, eyes sharp, coat buttoned with military precision. You're not alone, she said. And you're not wrong. Still, the weight pressed in. Marion could feel her heart in her fingertips. They stepped closer to the building. Every movement forward felt like cutting through something old grief, stale fear, pieces of her past clinging to her like cobwebs. A woman brushed past, heels sharp on the pavement. Her perfume followed sweet, cloying and familiar. Lavender. But not the kind Marion lit at the table. This was mass-produced. Synthetic. A knockoff of calm. She flinched. Just slightly. Just enough. David noticed. He tilted his head, waiting. I used to love that scent, Marion said, her voice barely audible. Before she wore it. David's jaw tightened, then softened. His hand hovered near hers, not touching, just there. You're here now, he said. She doesn't own that anymore. Marion blinked once, slow. The words landed heavier than he likely meant. She thought about the house, her father's voice, her mother's garden, the attic boxes Claire had tried to toss. All the things that made that home hers, turned into currency in someone else's mouth. Grace checked her watch. Courtroom 4. We're on the docket. The courthouse doors were only a few steps away, but Marion hesitated. What if the judge doesn't care about right or wrong? She asked. What if all they see is noise? Grace didn't flinch. Then we make the truth louder than the noise. David added, You've got the facts. You've got the voice. You walk in as yourself, and that's stronger than anything she's throwing. It wasn't a rallying cry. It wasn't meant to be, but it grounded her. Marion took a breath, then another. She stepped forward. The glass doors hissed open. The inside smelled like neutral paint and copier toner. The floor gleamed. Everything about it said, We don't care who you are. We only care what you can prove. Fine, she thought. I came with proof. They passed security. She gave her name at the counter. They were directed to the second floor, down a long hallway lined with courtroom doors like locked drawers in an old dresser. They reached courtroom 4. David touched her arm lightly before she entered. I'm right behind you. Marion nodded. She turned to the door. Her hand landed on the steel handle. And as it clicked shut behind her, Marion knew there was no stepping back. In court, Marion's soft voice shook a room built on tension and truth. Asterisk, asterisk, you'd. The courtroom air was sharp, almost metallic. The chill of the overhead vents mixed with the quiet murmur of shifting papers and low-voiced legal assistants. Marion stood at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped tightly in front of her. The folder pressed against her ribs wasn't just documentation, it was survival in Manila. Claire sat at the defense table, rigid, pale. Her eyes didn't meet Marion's. Her mouth was drawn tight, but there was no fight left in her posture. Regret had softened her edges, but not enough to erase what she'd done. Judge Harris entered briskly, his robe flowing behind him like a shadow. He was neither old nor young, with eyes that scanned quickly and lips that didn't smile. Let's proceed, he said, voice smooth and cool as tile. Grace stood first. Her tone was clinical, calm. Your Honor, we're presenting documentation establishing Marion Drake as the sole legal and equitable owner of the property in question, as well as banking and maintenance records demonstrating a pattern of contribution misrepresented in the respondent's lien. She passed the binder to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. The judge opened it without a word and began to flip through, eyes flicking over each tabbed page. Each turn of the sheet felt like a gavel to Marion. Claire didn't move. Her attorney shifted but said nothing. The judge looked up. Miss Drake, would you like to speak? Marion's hands were no longer trembling. She stepped forward. This house isn't just a structure to me, she began. It's my history. My parents' voices still echo in its rooms. I bled for it, bent over it, rebuilt pieces of it with my own hands. She paused. Yes, Claire helped at times. We built things together. But when I finally found the courage to reclaim my name, she used legal weapons to try and silence me. That lien wasn't about fairness, it was about punishment. Her voice didn't rise, but the words resonated. Clear. Full. David watched her from the bench behind. His eyes glistened, jaw tight. I'm not here to make her small, Marion added, nodding toward Claire. I'm here to be seen as whole. The courtroom was still. The judge turned to Grace. You've included the mortgage correspondence? Yes, Your Honor, she replied. Appendix C time-stamped emails, bank transfers, invoices bearing both names and others signed solely by Miss Drake. Judge Harris read silently for a moment longer. Then he closed the binder, exhaled through his nose, and spoke with finality. The lien is void. Sole ownership returns to Marion Drake. This court finds the respondent's filing to be retaliatory, lacking legal foundation. Claire exhaled sharply. Her hands dropped into her lap, fingers unclenching as if she'd finally accepted what couldn't be undone. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Marion didn't gloat. She didn't even glance Claire's way. She closed her eyes, let the decision wash over her like a slow, rain-cleansing reel. She hadn't just won. She'd endured. The court clerk approached with a sealed folder. For you, Miss Drake, she said almost gently. Marion opened it. Inside was a printed petition pages of signatures. Mary from next door, the gardener, the librarian, A dozen names she recognized, a dozen more she didn't. "We stand with Marion Drake." Asterisk the heading read. The signatures weren't elegant. Some were barely legible, but they were inked by people who'd watched her walk this long road and decided to walk with her now. She swallowed. David rose slowly behind her. Grace placed one hand on her shoulder. But Marion didn't speak. Not yet. Her eyes stayed on the page. She unfolded the petition wider and saw names stretched like a net that had been waiting to catch her. The petition spelled support and summoned Marion deeper. Marion sat alone in the back seat as David drove, the petition open across her lap. She read the names aloud in a whisper, one by one, each syllable steadier than the last. Ruth Timmons, Gerald Rivas, Len and Doreen Humphrey. Each signature carried a face, a neighbor who'd waved from behind hedges, someone who'd shoveled her walkway without asking, a child she'd once bandaged after a scraped knee on the sidewalk. Their quiet alliance had waited in the wings until now. Grace, seated beside her, glanced over. "You realize this isn't just about your house anymore, right?" Marion looked up. "This," Grace said, tapping the petition gently, "is what happens when one woman stands and others see themselves in her story." Marion folded the document again and held it tighter. "I never wanted a spotlight." "Sometimes," Grace said, smiling softly. "It finds you anyway." Back home, David helped her out of the car, his palm warm against hers. He didn't speak, just gave a small squeeze before letting go. His silence had grown heavier these past days, but in the weight was something different now. Not withdrawal, respect. She stepped inside her doorway, the threshold that, weeks ago, had felt like a battlefield. Now it was just home again, a quiet, steady space. Her own breath filled it. On the dining table lay a new envelope, hand-delivered. Grace opened it. Marion watched from across the room. "It's from the community center," Grace said. "They're hosting a town night. They'd like you to speak." Marion blinked. "Me?" David looked up from the window. "They're asking because you stood up when no one else would." Marion sat slowly. Her fingers ran over the edge of the envelope, her pulse tightening. She thought of Claire, how she had twisted charm into control, how she'd filled rooms with noise and claimed them with it. Marion had never wanted to be that, never wanted to be loud. But now, silence felt heavier. That night, Mrs. Evans stopped by with a Tupperware dish of cobbler. She placed it down gently, then stayed. "Heard you might be speaking next week," she said, removing her gloves. "You should." Marion didn't answer. "You think we all show up just for potlucks and raffles?" Mrs. Evans laughed softly. "We come because we need to see someone survive. Someone like us. That's what your voice is now." Marion met her eyes. "What if I'm not ready?" "You weren't ready for any of this. You did it anyway." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was clarifying. That night, Marion sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the small notepad in her lap. She didn't write anything, just sat with the weight of what was being asked. Then she looked up. In the hallway mirror, she saw herself, older than she remembered. Yes, but stronger than she'd ever known. She nodded once. "I'll do it," she said into the stillness. And just like that, Marion's private fight cracked open into something wider, her survival becoming someone else's map. The following week arrived faster than she expected. The room at the community center buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of folding chairs filled, one by one. A makeshift podium stood center stage, flanked by 2 donated lamps. David and Grace sat in the front row. Mrs. Evans waved from the third. Marion stood behind the curtain, heart pounding. The stage manager gave her a nod. The spotlight clicked on, and Marion stepped toward it. At the podium, Marion's voice shook fear and built resolve. The microphone hissed softly as Marion stepped behind it, her hands gripping the wood edges of the podium like it was the only solid thing in the room. The stage lights were warm and a little too bright, casting everything below her into gentle shadow. Her heart beat in her ears, loud and arrhythmic, drowning out the small coughs and chair shifts from the crowd. She looked out. There were more people than she'd expected, neighbors, familiar and not, Faces from grocery aisles and sidewalk chats. Mrs. Evans gave her a quiet thumbs up. Grace sat still, spine straight, eyes calm. David, standing in the far corner, nodded once. Steady, anchored. Marion exhaled, the microphone catching the sound. Then she spoke. "My name is Marion Drake," she said. And even just saying that, saying it aloud, saying it with no qualifiers, felt like kicking open a locked door. She paused, letting the room adjust to her voice. "Some of you know bits of the story. Maybe you've heard things, maybe you've guessed." She leaned closer, voice tightening not with panic, but precision. "There was a time I thought silence was the price of peace, that if I just stayed agreeable, stayed small, things would stay manageable. That was a lie I learned young, and one I carried into my adult life." The room was still. Even the children near the back were quiet. She told them about the deed, about the drawer, about the spritz of lemon that meant more than anyone could see. She didn't name Claire not direct, but the memory of her filled the gaps between sentences. "I let someone close to me redefine ownership," she said. "Not just of property, but of worth. I almost didn't fight it. Not because I thought she was right, but because I didn't believe I had the strength to push back." A small sob echoed from the third row. A woman wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "I found that strength, and now I want to use it." She didn't thank them. Not yet. Not like a conclusion. She just breathed. Then on the side of the Stygia, small screen flickered. A live feed from the back of the room. The event was streaming. On it, a split screen. And on one side, watching from somewhere unseen, was Claire. Her image was muted, but clear. She was seated at a kitchen table, hands curled under her chin, face unreadable except for the wet shine in her eyes. Grace noticed it too. Her gaze flicked from screen to stage, but she said nothing. The moderator stepped forward after a beat, a clipboard in hand. "We do have a remote viewer requesting to speak," she said gently, clearly not expecting it. "Claire Hallwell. She's asked for a minute." The room shifted. Tension rippled like wind brushing wheat. Marion didn't flinch. Claire's image blinked. Then slowly her hand moved toward her own microphone. And as her fingers touched the mic, her breath hitched holding the room in weight. Her apology was quiet, but its weight echoed inside Marion's heart. The auditorium held its breath. Claire's image on the screen was still shoulders tight, lips slightly parted, eyes searching for a place to land. The microphone at her end picked up the soft inhale before her voice broke through. "I am sorry," she said. "Truly." The words weren't dramatic. There was no begging, no pleading, just a sentence delivered without performance. But it cracked through the room like a bell. Marion didn't move, but something inside her did. Claire continued, her voice low but deliberate. "I was afraid. Not just of losing the house, but of losing who I'd become inside it. I clung too hard, too fast. I confused presence with belonging, and I hurt you." David shifted in the crowd, hands resting on the back of the chair in front of him, gaze steady on Marion. Grace didn't blink. Even Mrs. Evans had gone still. Her usual knit brow softened. Claire took one more breath, hands folded tightly together. "You didn't owe me anything, Marion, but you gave me more patience than I ever gave you credit for." There was no applause, no cue for it. But Marion felt her shoulders loosen. The air around her changed. The podium no longer felt like armor. It felt like grounding. She stepped slightly to the side of it. "I never needed you to crumble," she said, not looking at the screen. "I just needed you to stop pretending I didn't matter." There was no edge in her voice, no lingering venom, just truth, worn in and gentle. Claire nodded slowly. "I see that now." And that was it. No reconciliation hug, no flowery promises. Just acknowledgement. Just respect. Marion turned back toward the audience. She hadn't noticed how many people were standing. Not clapping, just standing. Quietly. As if to say, "We see you. We're still here." She met a few eyes. A woman from the corner store. An elderly man who walked his dog past her yard each morning. The post office clerk. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. but tonight felt clean. A local reporter, seated near the aisle, leaned forward as the moderator closed the event. "Miss Drake," she asked, pen poised over her pad, "where do you go from here?" Marion blinked. She looked at Grace, then David, then back toward the screen where Claire still sat, frozen in the live stream's delay, her face unexpectedly human. Marion glanced toward Claire then, smiled, quiet and real. Silence settled like a balm until a sudden knock broke it. The door clicked shut behind Marion. She turned the deadbolt slowly, almost reverently. The brass handle felt warmer than it had in months. She stood there for a beat, hand resting against the wood, listening not for danger, but for nothing, and finding it. Sunlight draped across the floors in golden ribbons. No voices, no lawyers' calls, no scent but cedar from the open windows and the ghost of clean air. She walked into the kitchen. The teapot whistled gently in cue. "Unscented lavender," Marion called to Mrs. Evans, who sat on the porch, fanning herself with a seed catalog. "No offense taken if you miss the real stuff." "I like it this way," Mrs. Evans said, without turning. "Doesn't try so hard." Marion smiled to herself, poured 2 mugs, and carried them out. As she handed one over, David came into view near the garden bedson, his knees, gloved hands patting down a patch of soil. He held up a tiny plant. Lavender. Real this time. Marion raised her mug in silent approval. They sat quietly, the 3 of them. No words needed. The air buzzed with the lightest breeze. Insects chirped lazily, the world exhaling in full. Later, Marion stood alone in the hallway, adjusting a frame. It held an old photo of her parents, smiling behind a lattice of honeysuckle. She had moved it here intentionally where it could be seen but not stared at, where it belonged. The house no longer felt like something to defend. It just felt like hers. Thena chime. Not aggressive, not pounding, just a knock, polite but sudden, at the front door. She startled, just slightly. Muscle memory. She breathed, placed the frame down. David had stood as well, visible through the screen door, but Marion held up a hand. "It's all right." She opened it to find a woman in a denim jacket and boots, holding a notepad. Mid-30s, nervous smile, press badge half tucked into her collar. "Miss Drake? Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. I saw your talk. Online. I'm local media. Independent. And I'm putting together a feature on women reclaiming home spaces." Marion didn't reply immediately. "I don't need much," the woman added quickly. "Just a few quotes. A sense of what comes after a story like yours." Marion studied her. The woman wasn't pushy, just hungry in the way young people often were for meaning. For the next headline with weight. Marion glanced back into the house, where Mrs. Evans now stood by the table, sipping her tea, where David had returned to his garden, where the lavender still waited for its roots to take hold. She turned back to the reporter. "One moment, please," Marion said, voice even. She stepped inside, walked to the living room where her journal lay open, its leather soft and slightly curled at the edges. The pen rested beside it, uncapped, still fresh. The last line she'd written, "This home breathes again." She didn't close the book. She didn't pick up the pen. She walked back out, down the steps, and stood eye to eye with the woman on the porch. "Can I help you?" she asked, the sun catching her shoulder, her voice steady, her journal waiting behind her. Night held Marion's doubt and dawn offered new conviction. The house was quiet again, but different, this Timeno, with relief, but with reflection. The kind that came when everything settled and there was nowhere left to run but inward. Marion sat at the kitchen table, one lamp glowing beside her, and reread the printed transcript of Claire's apology. The paper had been folded and unfolded too many times, creased like the skin at the corner of Marion's eyes. "I was afraid. I confused presence with belonging. You didn't owe me anything." Marion touched the edge of the page. Her tea had gone cold beside her. The clock over the stove ticked gently, its sound quieter than she remembered. She exhaled, barely a breath. "Was all of this necessary?" she murmured. Not in anger, not in regret. Just the question that floats in the quiet when the storm is past and the house still stands. Footsteps padded in from the hallway. Grace appeared, already in a robe, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. "Chamomile and mint," she said. "You look like you'd reached the questioning phase." Marion smiled softly. "That obvious?" "You get a certain stare, like you're trying to read the invisible parts of a story." Marion accepted the tea, cradling the warmth. "I feel like I've run a marathon on a treadmill. I'm back in the same house, same porch, same teacups. But the ground under them changed," Grace said. "And you didn't come back the same." They sat together, the silence stretching comfortably. "I'm tired," Marion admitted. "Not just from this, from the years before it." Grace didn't answer right away. She simply took the apology page from the table, read the last few lines, then set it down beside the deed folder. "I know," she said gently, "but the community heard you. Claire heard you. And maybe, most important, you finally heard yourself." Outside, the horizon was beginning to shift. Dawn spilled through the windows slowly, honey-soft and forgiving. Marion looked toward the sill where the potted lavender sat. Its leaves were still damp from the misting David had given it earlier. Just below it, her journal waited, its spine bent, its pages slowly filling. And next to that, the deed folder. Stamped. Legitimate. Hers. She rose and walked over, careful not to let her robe brush the leaves. She lifted the journal and gently tucked the apology sheet into the back cover. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a new folder, fresh, mint green, labeled in her own handwriting, "New Beginnings." She slid the apology inside. She placed the journal next to it. Then the deed. Each page, a weight rediscovered. Grace stood. Where to next? Marion didn't speak. She didn't need to. She zipped the folder shut, pressed her palm against it like sealing a promise. Then she turned, her silhouette caught in the first full beam of morning light. And with calm steps, Marion carried the folder forward toward the day waiting outside. Marion's next chapter sprouted with help, determination, and quiet strength. The living room had transformed, not into something new, but into something purposeful. Mrs. Evans leaned over a side table, squinting at a sheet of mock-up text. "What if we bold ownership here?" Marion sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through stacks of cardstock. Grace sat across from her with her laptop open, tweaking fonts in real time. The flyer read, "Own Your Space, a workshop on home, power, and starting over." Marion tilted her head, considering. "Let's keep it simple. No slogans. Just a voice people recognize." Grace clicked once, twice. "Done. And I've already sent the story to the Gazette. Light edit, full truth." Mrs. Evans clapped her hands lightly. "Your word's in print. That's something." Marion didn't respond, but her eyes softened. She'd stopped chasing the idea of being heard, and that was when people had started listening. Later that afternoon, David stepped inside, hands streaked with mulch. "Why not host it here?" he said casually, nodding toward the now cleared dining room. "It started in this house. It should be taught here too." Marion hesitated. The idea of opening up the space again, even on her terms, felt both intimate and exposing. But then she looked at the potted lavender and the photo of her parents. She nodded once. "Okay, but we set boundaries." David gave a thumbs up. "Already fixing up the patio." The hours passed in productive rhythm. Marion outlined workshop sessions, naming each one with clarity and care. Session 1, Claiming Space. Session 2, Legal Literacy. Session 3, Building Backward, Growing Forward. She wasn't writing a program. She was planting seeds. That evening, Grace arrived with a plain white envelope. "No return address," she said. "But I recognize the handwriting." Marion opened it. Inside, a check. Generous. Enough to cover materials, food, and a speaker honorarium. The memo line read, "For the roots you're growing." No name. But Marion didn't need one. Her breath hitched, just briefly. She looked at Grace. "I wasn't expecting—" "You weren't asking," Grace said. "That's why it came." Marion placed the check on top of the folder labeled New Beginnings, her hand resting on it like a quiet thank you. Later that night, the flyers were printed 50 in total. Crisp, clean, the ink still warm. Marion stacked them carefully, aligning the corners, smoothing the top page once with her palm. David walked past behind her and squeezed her shoulder gently. "You're ready," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The porch light glowed low. The front room smelled faintly of lavender and fresh paper. The world outside was quiet. She walked to the front door, flyers stack in hand. And as she placed them gently by the mat, Marion exhaled. The workshop would begin tomorrow. Voices once small found shape, and Marion led the chorus. The living room, once a space of whispers and tension, now pulsed with low, vibrant conversation. Folding chairs lined the edges, some borrowed, others mismatched, all filled. Women stood in doorways, leaned against walls, sat cross-legged near the fireplace. No one seemed to care where they were seated, only that they were present. A hand-painted sign hung above the mantel. "Own your space." Marion stood at the front of the room, her fingers wrapped loosely around a mug, not for comfort but as anchor. Her eyes swept over the women gathered, some older, others in their 20s, a few with infants sleeping against their chests. She spoke softly at first. "This home was nearly taken from me, not with violence, but with paper, with silence, with polite gestures that hid knives." There were nods, a few audible exhales. "I fought back, and I learned that reclaiming space isn't just about land, it's about voice." Then she stepped aside. The room shifted naturally. One woman stood, her voice shaky but growing, as she spoke of her mother's house being handed over to a brother without asking. Another told of a landlord who changed the locks when she asked for a copy of the lease. Each story was different, but the core was the same: displacement without dignity. By the third voice, the room was still, not heavy, focused. Marion didn't rush it. She let the silence after each story breathe. And then came the fourth voice, clear, unexpected. Claire. She stood near the back. No fanfare, no drama, just a quiet presence with her hands clasped in front of her. "I'm not here to teach," she said, "just to learn what I missed the first time." Marion didn't speak. She didn't need to. Claire sat back down. That was all. David sat off to the side, recording the session on a small handheld camera. His posture was relaxed, his focus sharp. Each time Marion moved, each time someone's voice cracked or lifted, he caught it not as documentation, but as honor. Grace stood in the archway, arms crossed lightly, a faint smile touching her lips, not one of smugness but of arrival. Her eyes followed each woman who stood, nodding as if she were witnessing prophecy fulfilled. At the end of the session, Marion returned to the front. She didn't speak right away, just looked at the mat, all of them. Then, quietly, she bowed. No applause followed, only movement. The rustle of coats, of hands exchanging numbers, of pens scratching onto a sign-up sheet at the table near the door. Marion noticed it last the list. Name after name. Ideas. Emails. Circles forming right there on paper. A woman from the East Side asked if they'd run another session next month. Another offered to bring folding chairs from her church. A younger woman asked if she could read something she'd written next time. Marion didn't promise anything. She just smiled and nodded. The final few minutes passed like mist lifting. Gentle goodbyes, dishes cleared, voices softened. When the last woman stepped onto the porch, Marion walked slowly back into the room. The chairs were empty now, but the air was full. She looked up at the mantel. The deed sat in a new frame. Marion glanced at it, then smiled, quiet and full, the room echoing with everything she'd reclaimed. Marion's spirit remained unscented, unfiltered, empowered, free. The sun was slow in its descent, casting long amber shafts through the living room windows. Dust particles floated like memory, suspended midair. Marion knelt in front of the mantel, her knees resting gently on the worn rug. The framed deed stood still, solid, real. She traced the edge of the frame with one finger. No drama, no tears, just reverence. From the kitchen came the gentle clink of porcelain. David poured 2 mugs of unscented lavender teasomething that had become their quiet ritual. No label, no artificial flavor, just steeped calm. He brought one over without a word and placed it beside her. They sat like that for a while, Marion on the rug, David on the arm of the couch, steam curling upward between them. Outside, the neighborhood breathed in rhythm. Children's laughter in the distance, a bike wheel squeaking past, Mrs. Evans on her porch swing waving through the evening light. Marion waved back. Then she reached for the small envelope that had arrived earlier in the day. Claire's handwriting. Neat. Familiar. She opened it slowly, unfolding a single sheet of cream paper. Marion, I've thought about that day on the live stream often. About how you looked, how you held the room. I didn't understand strength until I saw you do it without needing to destroy anyone in the process. Thank you for letting me attend, for letting me witness without asking for anything in return. I hope the lavender grows, even if it takes time. Claire. Marion read it twice, then a third time out loud. Her voice didn't tremble. David listened without comment. His eyes, when she glanced at him, were warm and sure. Later, she moved to her desk. The glow from the table lamp framed her hands as she typed the final flyer another workshop. This time with co-facilitators. The title stayed the same. But this one would be bigger. More than women now. More than her story. She hit print and watched the pages feed through. Outside, the wind chimes sang softly, 3 notes, perfectly spaced. The air was changing again. Not sharply, gently, inwardly. She stepped outside with the flyer in hand. David followed, bringing a blanket for the porch swing. They sat together, not pressed close, just near enough. The first stars were beginning to appear. The earth smelled like pine and rain and something new. Grace arrived a few minutes later, carrying a folder. 50 more sign-ups, she said, her voice low so as not to disturb the quiet. Marion only smiled. She didn't need to ask what the names meant. She knew. She held the final flyer in her lap, ran her thumb along the edge. No fanfare, no triumph, just forward motion. She rose slowly, walked back inside, set the flyer beside the original petition, now stored in a slim archival box. Then she returned to the mantel, took one last look at the deed and let it be background again. She didn't need to frame it anymore to remember. It lived in her bones now. Outside, the breeze picked up slightly. The chimes sounded again, more like a song than before. Marion stood on the porch, tea cooling in her hand. She looked at her house then beyond it. And then without ceremony, without prefaces, closed her eyes. She inhaled. Long. Deep. No lemon, no fake floral. Just air. Then she stepped forward, barefoot on wood. Fully homebody. Breath. A name entirely her own.